CEO brings his mistress home, but his wife is at the hospital with twins. Atlanta at night has a way of telling the truth about people. During the day, the city shines with ambition. Glass towers reflect sunlight like trophies. Expensive suits move between boardrooms. Everyone looks like they're winning. But at night, things get quieter. And when the city gets quiet, the truth tends to show up. Rain was falling steadily across Buckhead when Desmond turned his car into the long driveway of his house. The headlights swept across the smooth stone walls and wide glass windows before the garage door slowly lifted. The house looked exactly the way it always did. Clean, impressive, perfect. The kind of place real estate agents describe as a symbol of success. But Desmond didn't feel successful when he looked at it tonight. He felt tired. The woman sitting in the passenger seat stretched her arms and looked out the window. "So, this is the famous house," she said with a teasing smile. Desmond gave a small nod as he parked the car. Rain tapped against the windshield in steady rhythm. "It's just a house," he replied. She laughed softly. "You say that like most people have one, like it." Desmond didn't answer, because something about the quiet around the house felt strange tonight. Not dangerous, just wrong. He turned off the engine. For a second, neither of them moved. The rain filled the silence. The woman reached over and touched his arm lightly. "You okay?" she asked. "Long day," Desmond said quickly. That had become his favorite explanation for everything. Long day, long meeting, long week. A convenient answer that usually ended conversations. But tonight the words didn't feel convincing. The woman opened her door first and stepped out into the rain. Desmond followed a second later. They hurried toward the front entrance, shoulders brushing as they ran under the porch roof. The moment he opened the door, the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and expensive candles greeted them. Everything inside looked perfectly arranged. The furniture, the art, the spotless kitchen counter visible down the hall. The house looked like someone had staged it for a magazine photo. The woman stepped inside and slowly turned in a circle. "Wow," she said. "You weren't kidding." Desmond closed the door behind them. "You want something to drink?" he asked. "Water's fine." She walked toward the living room while he headed for the kitchen. But halfway to the refrigerator, Desmond stopped. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He stared at it for a moment. Something about it made his chest tighten slightly. The call kept ringing. From the living room, the woman's voice floated through the house. "You coming?" "Yeah," Desmond replied, but he didn't move. Instead, he stepped into the hallway and answered the call. "Hello?" A calm voice spoke on the other end. "Mr. Desmond?" "Yes. This is Northside Hospital in Atlanta." Desmond frowned slightly. Hospitals rarely call people for good reasons. "Okay. We've been trying to reach you." His grip on the phone tightened. "About what?" There was a small pause before the nurse spoke again. "You were listed as the emergency contact for Zara." The name hit him like a sudden punch to the chest. Zara. For a moment his mind went blank. "Is she okay?" he asked quickly. Another pause. "Yes. She's stable." Stable? That word carried more questions than answers. Desmond leaned against the wall. "What happened?" The nurse spoke carefully. "She delivered twins earlier tonight." The hallway went completely silent. Desmond's heart slammed once against his ribs. "Twins?" "Yes, sir," the nurse confirmed gently. "A boy and a girl." He stared down at the floor. His brain struggled to catch up. Zara. Pregnant. Twins. 9 months of life he never knew existed. 2 children. His children. At that exact moment, the woman in the living room called out again. "Desmond?" The sound of her voice drifted down the hallway. 2 completely different realities colliding at once. The nurse continued speaking. "She asked if you should be notified." Desmond swallowed hard. Across the city, Zara was lying in a hospital bed beside 2 newborn babies, and he had just walked into his house with another woman. Life has a strange way of revealing the truth all at once. Desmond closed his eyes briefly. Then he spoke quietly into the phone. "I'm coming to the hospital." He hung up. For a moment, he didn't move. Rain tapped softly against the windows. In the living room, the woman stood up from the couch. "You good?" she asked. Desmond walked back into the room slowly. Something inside him had shifted. I have to go out, he said. Her eyebrows lifted. Now? Yes. She studied his face carefully. What's going on? Desmond hesitated, because the truth had just arrived, and it was about to change everything. Before we continue this story, take a moment with me. If this opening already has you thinking about how complicated life can become when honesty gets delayed, show some love by liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Moments like this are where real life lessons begin. And I'm curious about something. If you received a call like the one Desmond just did, what would you do next? Also, tell me something fun. Drop a comment with the time and the city you're watching from right now. It's always amazing seeing how many different places connect through one story. Welcome to Mr. Stephen's Stories, where powerful life lessons are shared through unforgettable storytelling. If you're new here, we're glad to have you. Subscribe and join us for more inspiring stories that motivate, uplift, and open the mind. Because the story you're about to hear is only just beginning. Long before that phone call reached Desmond's ear, before the Buckhead house, before the rain, before the silence that suddenly felt heavy, Zara had already built a life most people underestimated. Atlanta is a city that teaches people how to survive early. Not just the polished Atlanta people post on social media, the real Atlanta. The one where neighborhoods carry history in every block, the one where families remember who helped them when times were hard. Zara grew up on the west side of the city, in a neighborhood where everybody knew your grandmother's name before they ever learned yours. Front porches stayed busy during the evenings. Neighbors watched each other's kids. Music drifted from passing cars while somebody down the street grilled food that smelled too good to ignore. It wasn't a wealthy neighborhood, but it was alive. Zara's grandmother used to sit near the window every Sunday afternoon, watching the street like a quiet guardian. And every now and then she would say something that sounded simple, but carried weight. Baby, she would tell Zara, the world will test your dignity before it ever rewards your kindness. At 10 years old, Zara didn't understand what that meant. At 32, she understood it perfectly, because life had tested her more than once. Zara wasn't the type of woman who waited for opportunities to appear. She created them. By the time most people her age were still figuring out their direction, Zara had already built a marketing company from scratch, a small office downtown. Nothing flashy, but inside that space, something powerful was happening. Zara worked with local black-owned restaurants trying to expand, artists searching for larger audiences, small businesses that had talent but needed visibility. Her job wasn't just advertising. Her job was helping people believe their dreams were worth fighting for. And people respected her for that. The office had its own energy, music playing quietly through a speaker, coffee cups scattered across desks, laughter breaking out during long brainstorming sessions. It smelled like perfume, fresh paper, and determination. Zara carried herself differently than most business owners people met. She wasn't loud about her success. She was steady. Her skin carried that rich, deep brown tone that seemed to glow under Atlanta sunlight. Her eyes watched people carefully before deciding how much of her trust they deserved. And her smile arrived slowly, like it had to make sure you earned it first. People sometimes assumed Zara was intimidating. The truth was simpler. She had standards, high ones. Her grandmother used to tease her about it. "Girl," she'd say while stirring something in the kitchen, "your standards are taller than those downtown skyscrapers." Zara would laugh, but deep down she knew exactly why she was careful with her heart. Because love had never been simple in the lives of the women who raised her. She watched strong women give everything to men who weren't ready to give the same back. She watched loyalty get mistaken for weakness. She watched patience turn into silent suffering. And she made a quiet promise to herself early in life. She would never build her happiness on someone else's confusion. That promise shaped the way she dated. Or more accurately, why she didn't date often. It wasn't because she lacked options. Zara had plenty of men interested in her. Successful men. Ambitious men. Men who noticed the way she walked into rooms with quiet confidence. But Zara paid attention to character, and character takes time to reveal itself. Most people didn't pass her internal test. Until Desmond entered her life. The first time Zara saw him, she didn't know who he was. And honestly, she didn't care. It was one of those networking events downtown. The kind where business cards change hands faster than real conversations. Most people in the room were performing success. Big smiles. Loud laughs. Conversations that sounded impressive but rarely meant anything. Zara had come because a friend convinced her the event might connect her with a few potential clients. But she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was standing near a small group of entrepreneurs telling a story about one of her early marketing clients, a restaurant owner who once tried to pay her in exposure instead of money. The group burst into laughter. Zara laughed hardest, the kind of laugh that makes your shoulders shake, the kind of laugh you don't perform. Across the room, Desmond noticed it. He didn't hear the whole story, but he noticed something rare: authenticity. In a room full of people trying to appear important, Zara looked completely comfortable being herself, and that caught his attention immediately. Eventually, someone brought them together. "Zara, this is Desmond." Zara looked him over once. Tall, sharp jawline, well-dressed in that quiet, expensive way that didn't need to show off. But none of that impressed her. She had met plenty of polished men before. "You're the logistics guy, right?" she asked. Desmond blinked slightly. Most people reacted differently when they learned who he was. They tried harder, spoke differently. Zara just took a sip of her drink. "I heard your company's growing fast," she added casually. That kind of pressure must be wild. It wasn't admiration, it was observation, and something about that made Desmond relax. For the first time that night, he wasn't talking to someone who saw him as a business opportunity. She saw him as a person. They talked for 30 minutes, then another 30. Eventually the room began emptying. Event staff started stacking chairs, but Desmond and Zara were still talking about Atlanta culture, about business struggles, about the strange pressure that success can bring. By the time they finally walked outside that night, Desmond realized something surprising. He didn't want the conversation to end, and Zara, she felt something unexpected too. Not attraction. Not yet. Curiosity, because there was something about Desmond she couldn't quite figure out. A man who had everything most people chased, yet carried a quiet tiredness in his eyes, like success had arrived faster than peace. Neither of them knew it yet, but that night had quietly started a chain of decisions that would eventually lead to the hospital room, and 2 newborn babies sleeping beside their mother. But the road between that first conversation and the moment Desmond's phone rang in his hallway still had a lot of truth waiting to surface. When most people in Atlanta heard the name Desmond, they thought about success. Not the loud kind that brags on social media, the quieter kind that investors talk about behind closed doors. Desmond had built a logistics technology company that moved products across the country faster and more efficiently than most competitors. Warehouses, software systems, delivery networks. His company connected them all, and it worked. Money flowed in quickly. Investors trusted him. Employees depended on him. Within a few years, his company became one of the fastest-growing operations in Midtown. By 38, Desmond had achieved the kind of life people spend decades chasing. A luxury condo overlooking the skyline, tailored suits that fit perfectly without looking flashy, dinner meetings in restaurants where the wine list alone could pay someone's rent. From the outside, his life looked flawless. But people rarely see the full picture of success, because success doesn't always come with peace. And peace was something Desmond hadn't felt in a long time. His days moved quickly. Morning meetings, investor calls, strategy sessions with executives, decisions that affected hundreds of employees. He handled all of it with calm confidence. But when the workday ended, the quiet started. And quiet has a way of exposing things people avoid, especially inside a marriage that had slowly stopped working. Desmond had been married for years before he ever met Zara. At one time, the relationship had felt promising. 2 ambitious people building a life together, supporting each other, planning a future. But somewhere along the way, the connection faded. Not suddenly, gradually. Arguments became more frequent, then the arguments stopped. And when arguments disappear completely, that can sometimes be worse. Because silence means people have stopped trying to fix things. The house they shared in Buckhead had once been full of plans. Now it mostly held distance. Dinner conversations became shorter. Long work hours became excuses. Both of them moved through the same rooms like strangers politely sharing space. By the time Desmond met Zara at that networking event, his marriage had already been emotionally finished for a long time. But legally, it still existed. And that difference matters more than people like to admit. Because emotional separation doesn't erase responsibility, It only delays difficult decisions. Desmond told himself he was working toward resolving it. He told himself the paperwork would happen soon. He told himself everyone involved understood the situation. But the truth was less comfortable. He kept delaying the final step, avoiding confrontation, hoping things would sort themselves out. Many people do that. They stay halfway inside situations because stepping fully into the truth requires courage. And courage isn't always easy when reputations and emotions are involved. That hesitation followed Desmond into his relationship with Zara. At first, their connection stayed harmless. Just conversations, business discussions, occasional dinners. Zara challenged him in ways most people didn't. She didn't treat him like a powerful CEO. She treated him like a man who had thoughts, opinions, and responsibilities beyond business success. And Desmond found himself enjoying that, more than he expected. The dinners lasted longer. The phone calls stretched later into the night. They debated ideas about culture, business growth, race, and the future of Atlanta. Zara introduced him to parts of the city he had never truly experienced before. Late-night food spots where conversations flowed easily. Community events where people supported each other's businesses. Family cookouts where laughter felt genuine. Desmond realized something important during those months. He had spent years moving inside corporate spaces. Boardrooms, luxury restaurants, investor conferences. But Atlanta had layers he had barely explored. And Zara moved through those layers naturally. Meanwhile, Desmond introduced Zara to a different world. Private rooftop dinners overlooking the skyline. Weekend trips that started with spontaneous flights. Business events where people recognized his name before he finished introducing himself. Two completely different environments, two completely different lives, and somehow, the rhythm between them worked, at least for a while. But even beautiful connections can carry hidden complications, because Desmond had never fully explained his situation at home. Not clearly, not honestly. When Zara eventually learned that he was still legally married, the discovery hit her hard. Not because she was naive, but because she valued clarity, and clarity had been missing from the story. The conversation that followed nearly ended their relationship. Zara had stood in her kitchen that evening listening carefully as Desmond tried to explain. "It's already over," he told her. "We're just handling the legal part." Zara crossed her arms and studied his face. "How long has it been almost over?" she asked. Desmond hesitated, and hesitation answers more questions than words sometimes. Still, he convinced her to stay. Not with dramatic promises, just with the confidence of someone who believed he could fix the situation eventually. Zara didn't fully believe him, but she believed the connection between them felt real. And sometimes when emotions feel genuine, people give situations more time than they should. That choice quietly changed both of their lives, because love that begins inside complicated circumstances rarely stays simple. Months passed. Their relationship deepened, and neither of them realized something else had quietly entered the story. A future neither of them had planned, because one morning, not long after that difficult conversation about Desmond's marriage, Zara sat on the edge of her bathroom tub holding a small white pregnancy test in her hand. 2 pink lines. Clear, unmistakable. For a long time she didn't move. Her mind raced through possibilities, questions, consequences. She knew exactly who the father was, but the bigger question wasn't about biology. The bigger question was about timing, because bringing a child into a complicated situation changes everything, and Zara understood that better than most people. That moment, sitting alone in her bathroom, marked the beginning of 9 months of quiet decisions. 9 months of carrying a truth that would eventually reach Desmond through a phone call in the middle of a rainy night. The same phone call that had just pulled him away from his house and toward the hospital where 2 newborn babies were waiting to meet their father. But what neither Desmond nor Zara understood yet was that the hardest part of their story wasn't the pregnancy. It was the moment when every hidden truth would finally meet in the same room. The night Desmond first noticed Zara did not feel important at the time. No music swelling in the background. No sudden realization that life was about to change. Just another Atlanta business event where people showed up hoping to be seen. The venue sat near Midtown, inside a renovated industrial building that now hosted networking mixers for young professionals and entrepreneurs. Exposed brick walls, tall windows, warm lighting, and a bar set up near the back where conversations often became louder as the night went on. Events like this happened across Atlanta every week. People came dressed sharply, business cards in their pockets, prepared elevator pitches ready to impress whoever happened to be listening. Desmond had attended dozens of them. Most of them felt the same. Short conversations that rarely meant anything, smiles that disappeared the moment someone more useful walked into view. He only came that evening because one of his investors insisted it would be good for community exposure. "Your company is growing fast," the investor had told him earlier that week. "People should see your face more often." So Desmond showed up. His suit fit perfectly, the kind that didn't try too hard to prove it was expensive. He moved through the room politely, shaking hands, exchanging quick greetings, nodding when people mentioned his company. But after 30 minutes, the familiar boredom settled in. The room was full. People standing in small circles discussing ideas, funding, marketing strategies. A few people laughed too loudly. Others glanced around constantly, scanning for someone more interesting to talk to. Desmond stepped toward the bar and ordered a drink he didn't really want. He leaned slightly against the counter and watched the room the way people do when they're deciding how long they plan to stay. That was when he heard the laugh. It came from across the room, loud, uncontrolled, the kind of laugh that interrupts conversations nearby. Desmond turned his head. Near one of the tall windows stood a small group of entrepreneurs talking together. In the middle of that group was Zara. She wasn't trying to command attention. She simply had it. Her shoulders shook as she laughed, one hand covering her mouth while she tried to finish a story. "And then the man tells me he doesn't have the budget," she said, still laughing, "but he offers to pay me with exposure." The group burst into laughter again. One of the men shook his head. "Exposure is the favorite currency of broke clients." Zara nodded dramatically. "Apparently exposure pays rent now," she joked. Desmond found himself smiling, not because the joke was extraordinary, because the moment felt real. Nobody in that circle was trying to impress anyone. They were simply sharing the struggles of building businesses. That authenticity stood out in a room where many conversations sounded rehearsed. He watched a moment longer. Zara leaned against the window casually, sipping her drink while listening to another entrepreneur describe a failed marketing campaign. Her attention stayed on whoever was speaking. She didn't interrupt. She didn't perform interest. She listened carefully. That detail caught Desmond's attention even more than the laughter. A few minutes later, someone he knew approached him. "You hiding over here?" the man asked. Desmond shrugged lightly. "Just observing." The man followed Desmond's gaze across the room. "Oh," he said knowingly. "You spotted Zara." "Zara?" "Yeah, runs a marketing firm downtown. She helps local businesses grow their brand. Real sharp." Desmond nodded slowly. The man gave a small grin. "You should meet her." Before Desmond could respond, the man was already walking toward the group by the window. Desmond followed. The conversation paused slightly as they approached. "Everyone," the man said, gesturing casually. "This is Desmond." A few people nodded politely. But Zara looked at him with calm curiosity, not excitement, not intimidation, just observation. "You're the logistics guy, right?" she asked. Desmond blinked once. That was not the reaction he was used to. "Yes," he said. "I've heard about your company," Zara continued. "You've been expanding pretty quickly." Her tone wasn't admiring. It sounded analytical. "Growth can be complicated," Desmond replied. Zara nodded slowly. "I bet." She took a sip of her drink. "That kind of expansion puts a lot of pressure on leadership." Desmond tilted his head slightly. "You sound like you've studied the problem." "I run a marketing company," she said with a small smile. "Half my job is helping business owners survive their own success." The group chuckled. Desmond felt something unfamiliar. He was enjoying the conversation, not because people were praising his achievements, because nobody here cared enough to impress him. They talked about Atlanta, about how small businesses struggle to compete with large corporations, about how marketing budgets often decided whether great ideas survived. The conversation stretched. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 40. At some point, people began leaving the group to talk with others. But Zara and Desmond stayed where they were. Eventually, someone glanced around the room. "Looks like the event's winding down," one of the entrepreneurs said. Staff members near the bar were already beginning to clean up. Zara checked the time on her phone. "Guess that means we've officially talked longer than most networking conversations." Desmond smiled slightly. "That might be the most productive part of the evening." She studied him carefully. You don't like these events much, do you? Desmond exhaled. They tend to feel repetitive. Zara laughed softly. People trying to sell each other dreams. Something like that. She nodded. That's why I usually stay near the windows, she said. Why the windows? Easy escape route. Desmond laughed. For a moment they both looked out toward the city lights glowing beyond the glass. Cars moved slowly along the streets below. Atlanta always looked alive at night. Zara finished the last sip of her drink. Well, Desmond, she said casually, it was interesting meeting you. Interesting? He asked. That's the word I use when I'm still deciding what I think. Desmond raised an eyebrow. And what do you think so far? Zara smiled faintly. I think you're a man who built something impressive. She paused. But I also think you look like someone who hasn't slept properly in months. Desmond blinked again. That level of honesty was unusual. He didn't feel offended. If anything, he felt understood. Well, he admitted quietly, that observation might not be wrong. Zara laughed again. Not loud this time. Just warm. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a simple business card. Here, she said, handing it to him. If you ever need marketing advice. Desmond accepted the card. Our conversations might be more interesting outside networking events, he replied. Zara tilted her head slightly. Maybe. Then she walked toward the exit. Desmond stood near the window for another moment, holding the card between his fingers. He hadn't planned to stay long that night. But something about that conversation lingered. Not attraction. Not yet. Something quieter. Curiosity. And curiosity has a way of starting stories people never expect. The first message Desmond sent Zara came 3 days after the networking event. He had picked up her business card more than once since that night, reading the simple black lettering printed across it. No flashy slogan. No long description. Just her name and the work she did. The simplicity felt very much like her. He had typed a message twice before deleting it. Starting conversations always felt strange when you weren't sure if the other person expected to hear from you. Eventually, he stopped overthinking and sent something simple. Dinner sometime this week? I'd like to continue that conversation about Atlanta business culture. Several hours passed before Zara responded. Her reply was short. Only if it's an actual conversation and not another networking event disguised as dinner. Desmond smiled when he read it. Deal. That dinner became the first of many. They met at a small restaurant just outside Midtown, a place Zara liked because the food was good and nobody inside cared about business titles. The tables were close together. Music played quietly overhead. The smell of grilled food and spices filled the room. When Desmond arrived, Zara was already seated near the window. She looked up from the menu and gave a small nod. You showed up on time, she said. I try to keep promises, Desmond replied. Zara smiled faintly. Good habit. The conversation started easily. They talked about work first. Zara explained how her marketing company helped local businesses grow their visibility in a city where larger companies often controlled the spotlight. Desmond listened carefully. You're basically teaching businesses how to tell their story, he said. Exactly, Zara replied. People underestimate how important that is. She leaned forward slightly. Atlanta is full of talented people. But talent alone doesn't guarantee success. If nobody knows your story, you disappear. Desmond nodded. In logistics, it's similar. The systems behind the scenes decide whether businesses succeed or struggle. Zara pointed at him with a grin. See, that's why we're having dinner. Their conversations move naturally from business into deeper topics. Atlanta's culture, the music scene, the complicated balance between money and community growth. Hours passed before either of them noticed. When the bill arrived, Zara leaned back in her chair. Okay, she said. That was worth leaving the house for. Desmond laughed quietly. I'll take that as a compliment. Over the next few weeks, the dinners continued. But something interesting happened. Their meetings stopped feeling like planned events. They became conversations that simply continued wherever they happened to be. Sometimes they met for coffee between meetings. Sometimes they walked through neighborhoods where Zara introduced Desmond to small restaurants he had never noticed before. One Friday evening, she took him to a late-night food spot on the west side. Plastic chairs, music playing from someone's car in the parking lot, people laughing loudly over plates of food. Desmond looked around curiously. I've driven past this place 100 times, he admitted. And never stopped, Zara said. That's because most people stay inside their own version of the city. She handed him a plate. Eat. The food was incredible. Desmond laughed halfway through the meal. You might have just ruined every expensive restaurant I've been to this year. Zara shrugged. Good food doesn't need a fancy table. Moments like that slowly shifted something inside him. He had lived in Atlanta for years, but through Zara, he began seeing parts of the city he had ignored. Meanwhile, Desmond introduced Zara to parts of his world too. Rooftop dinners with views stretching across the skyline. Business events where people greeted him by name the moment he entered the room. One evening, they stood on a private rooftop overlooking the city lights. Zara rested her arms against the railing. Your world is polished, she said. Desmond chuckled softly. That's one word for it. You don't seem very impressed by it. I'm used to it. Zara glanced sideways at him. Success gets boring? Not boring, he said thoughtfully. Just demanding. She studied his face for a moment. You carry a lot of responsibility. Desmond nodded. That's the polite version. Zara leaned back against the railing. Well, she said, at least you don't pretend everything is perfect. Desmond smiled slightly. That's because it isn't. Their conversations gradually became more personal. Not all at once. Slowly. One evening while walking through a quiet park, Zara mentioned something from her childhood. My grandmother used to say the world tests your dignity before it rewards your kindness. Desmond looked at her. That sounds like someone who lived through a lot. She did. And you believe that advice? Zara nodded. Every day. He thought about that for a moment. That explains your standards. Zara laughed softly. Too high. Strong, Desmond corrected. Moments like that built something between them. Trust, understanding, comfort. Neither of them rushed it. There were no dramatic declarations. Just two people discovering they enjoyed the way the other saw the world. Months passed this way. Conversations stretching past midnight. Phone calls discussing business ideas. Debates about culture and ambition. Eventually their connection shifted into something deeper. Not suddenly, but clearly. They began spending more time together. Weekends, late dinners, quiet evenings talking about future plans. It felt natural, comfortable, real. But even the strongest connections can carry hidden complications. Because there was something Desmond hadn't fully explained yet. Something Zara would eventually discover. And when she did, the direction of their relationship would change completely. Before we continue this story, I want to hear your thoughts. Right now, based on everything you've seen about Zara and Desmond, do you think Zara should have trusted him as much as she did? Or would you have stepped away the moment things started feeling complicated? Drop your answer in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else watching this story learn something valuable. And if the story is pulling you in so far, take a second to like the video so more people can find it too. Because the next moment in this story is where the truth finally shows up. For a while, Zara allowed herself to enjoy the simplicity of the connection she and Desmond had built. Not because life had suddenly become easy, but because their relationship felt honest in the ways that mattered most. They talked openly. They challenged each other's ideas. They laughed often. Most importantly, neither of them tried to impress the other with things that didn't matter. Zara respected that. And respect was not something she gave away easily. By the time autumn arrived in Atlanta, spending time together had quietly become part of their routine. Friday dinners, late evening conversations after work, occasional weekends when both of them managed to escape their busy schedules. Nothing dramatic, just consistency. But sometimes the things people don't say carry more weight than the things they do. And one evening, that silence finally revealed itself. They were sitting at Zara's kitchen table. A quiet Tuesday night. Takeout containers spread between them, the kind of meal people eat when they've both worked too long and nobody feels like cooking. Zara leaned back in her chair, scrolling through something on her phone. Did you see the news about that restaurant on Peachtree closing? She asked. Desmond looked up from his plate. Which one? The one that had the rooftop patio. They've been there for years. Oh, Desmond said. I heard something about that. Zara nodded. Rent went up again. Owner couldn't keep up. She placed the phone down and looked at him. That's happening all over the city now. Desmond sighed. Growth changes neighborhoods faster than people expect. For a moment the conversation drifted into familiar territory. Business, Atlanta, economic pressure. Then Zara asked a question that changed everything. "Can I ask you something personal?" Desmond glanced at her. "Sure." She hesitated briefly before speaking. "You mentioned once that you used to live in Buckhead." "Yeah," Desmond said. "Used to." He paused. A small pause. But Zara noticed it immediately. "Yes," he replied carefully. "You don't live there anymore?" Desmond took a sip of water. "I still have the house." Zara's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Still?" Another pause. "This one longer." Zara leaned forward. "Desmond," she said slowly, "are you married?" The question landed between them like a sudden shift in the air. Desmond didn't answer right away, and in that moment, Zara already knew the truth. "Yes," he said quietly. The room became very still. Zara sat back in her chair. Her face didn't explode with anger. She didn't shout, but the disappointment in her eyes was impossible to ignore. "How long were you planning to wait before mentioning that?" she asked. Desmond rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not what you think." Zara gave a small, humorless laugh. "That sentence never leads to good explanations." He leaned forward, trying to keep his voice calm. "My marriage has been over for a long time." Zara folded her arms. "Over emotionally or over legally?" "Emotionally," Desmond admitted. "So legally, you're still married?" "Yes." The silence that followed was heavy. Zara stood up and walked to the kitchen sink, staring out the window for a moment before turning back. "You should have told me this earlier," she said. "I know. Not after months of dinners." "I know. Not after letting this turn into something real." "I know," he repeated. Zara studied his face carefully. "Not searching for excuses. Searching for honesty. How long has it been over between you and your wife?" she asked. Desmond exhaled slowly. "Years." "Then, why are you still married?" He hesitated. "Because ending a marriage is complicated." Zara tilted her head slightly. "Complicated how?" Desmond ran his hands together. "There are financial agreements, property issues, lawyers involved, things that take time." Zara listened quietly, but she had grown up around strong women who recognized half-truths when they heard them. "So the marriage isn't finished," she said calmly. "It's in the process." Zara shook her head slowly. "That's not the same thing." Desmond looked frustrated. "I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't want it to affect what we were building." Zara laughed again, this time sharper. "It already affects it." She walked back to the table. "You don't get to decide when information like that becomes important." Desmond didn't argue, because she was right. Zara leaned both hands on the table and looked directly at him. "I need to think about this." Desmond nodded. "I understand. You should probably go," she added. He stood slowly. For a moment it looked like he might say something more, but he didn't. Instead, he walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. "What we have is real," he said quietly. Zara didn't answer. The door closed, and the apartment fell silent. That night Zara didn't sleep much. She sat on her couch replaying the entire relationship in her mind. The conversations, the laughter, the trust she had slowly allowed herself to feel. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "The world will test your dignity before it rewards your kindness." Zara sighed. Life was testing that lesson again. Part of her wanted to walk away completely, to protect herself before things became even more complicated. But another part of her knew something difficult. The connection she felt with Desmond had not been fake. He had not lied about everything. He had simply delayed telling the truth about something that mattered, and that kind of mistake lives in a complicated gray area. The next evening, Desmond called. Zara stared at the phone for a long time before answering. "I'm listening," she said when she picked up. Desmond's voice sounded tired. "I should have told you earlier." "Yes, my marriage ended emotionally years ago. That still doesn't mean it's finished." "I know." There was a long pause. "I'm working on ending it legally," he continued. "It's just slower than I expected." Zara closed her eyes briefly. "Desmond, I'm not interested in becoming part of someone else's unfinished life. I understand that." Another silence. Then he said something simple. "I care about you." Zara didn't respond immediately, because caring about someone doesn't erase complicated realities, but it does make decisions harder. "Give me some time to think," she said. "I will." They ended the call. Days passed. then weeks. During that time, Zara tried to create distance. She focused on work, on clients, on the life she had built long before Desmond appeared. But emotions rarely follow clean schedules. Eventually, their conversations returned. Carefully at first, then more naturally. Zara told herself something she believed was reasonable. The marriage was already ending. The paperwork simply hadn't caught up yet. And sometimes, people convince themselves a situation will resolve soon because they want to believe the connection they feel is worth the risk. Months later, on a quiet morning in her apartment, Zara woke up feeling strange. Not sick exactly, just different. She walked into the bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. A thought formed slowly, then another. Half an hour later, she sat on the edge of the bathtub holding a small white pregnancy test. 2 clear pink lines. Zara stared at it. Her mind went silent, because one truth had just arrived, and it would change every decision she made from that moment forward. She whispered one word under her breath, Desmond, but the question that followed felt much heavier. What happens when new life enters a situation that was already complicated? That answer was still waiting 9 months in the future, and neither of them knew how powerful that moment would become. The bathroom was quiet, too quiet. Zara sat on the edge of the bathtub holding the small plastic test between her fingers, staring at it like the result might somehow change if she waited long enough. 2 pink lines. Clear. Undeniable. For a moment she didn't breathe. Her mind tried to process what she was seeing, but thoughts refused to form into anything organized. It felt like standing in the middle of a room where every clock suddenly started ticking at the same time. Pregnant. The word didn't arrive gently. It landed all at once. Zara leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees while still holding the test. The apartment around her felt strangely distant, like the walls had stepped back and left her alone with the reality forming inside her body. She had always believed she would become a mother one day, but not like this. Not inside a situation that already carried so many unanswered questions. Not with a man whose life was still tied to a marriage that hadn't officially ended. Her eyes drifted toward the mirror above the sink. For a long moment she simply looked at her own reflection. Same face. Same woman who had built a business from nothing. Same woman who had learned how to handle pressure without losing her sense of direction. Yet something had already changed, because suddenly the future wasn't just about her anymore. Zara placed the pregnancy test carefully on the counter. Then she stood up and paced slowly across the bathroom floor. Okay, she whispered softly. The word felt like the beginning of a conversation with herself. Not panic, not celebration, just acceptance that life had shifted. Her first instinct was simple. Tell Desmond, but the thought stopped her almost immediately. She leaned against the sink and closed her eyes. Telling him would change everything, and she wasn't ready for that yet, because their relationship was still standing on fragile ground. Desmond had told her the marriage was already finished emotionally. He said the legal process was moving forward, but Zara understood something that many people try to ignore. Until paperwork is signed, a marriage still exists, and bringing a child into that space would make everything heavier, more complicated, more public. She walked back into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, spreading across the floor in quiet lines. Zara placed both hands on her stomach. Nothing felt different physically. No sudden sensation, no dramatic change. But she knew what was happening inside her body. A tiny life had already begun. The thought alone carried enormous responsibility. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She glanced at the screen. Desmond. The timing made her chest tighten. For a second she considered ignoring the call. But that felt dishonest. So she answered. Good morning, Desmond said. His voice sounded calm, relaxed in a way that made Zara realize how normal his day probably felt. Morning, she replied. You sound tired. I stayed up late finishing some work, she said. Not a lie, just not the full truth either. Desmond chuckled softly. You need to stop overworking yourself. Zara smiled faintly. Someone once told me success requires discipline. That sounds like something I would say. They talked for a few minutes about ordinary things. Meetings, schedules, plans for the weekend. The conversation flowed easily, just like it always had. And that made Zara's decision even harder. Because the moment she told him about the pregnancy, nothing about their conversations would ever be ordinary again. Eventually Desmond paused. You're quiet today, he said. Just thinking. About work? Something like that. There was a brief silence on the phone. Then he spoke again. Dinner tomorrow night? Zara hesitated. Normally she would say yes without thinking, but tonight her mind felt crowded. I might need a rain check, she said gently. Everything okay. Just a lot going on. Desmond didn't push. All right, he said. Let me know when you're free. I will. They ended the call. Zara placed the phone down slowly and stared at the ceiling. A strange calm settled inside her. Not the calm of certainty, the calm of someone realizing that a decision had already been made. She wasn't going to tell him yet. Not because she wanted to hide the truth forever, but because she needed time. Time to understand what kind of future she wanted for this child. Time to see whether Desmond's life truly moved toward the clarity he promised. Time to prepare herself emotionally for whatever came next. Because motherhood is not a decision you step into casually. It demands strength, planning, courage. Zara stood up and walked back into the bathroom. The pregnancy test still rested on the counter. She picked it up again and studied the lines. 2 small marks that had just rearranged her entire life. She placed the test inside the cabinet and closed the door gently. For now, the truth would remain with her. Just her. That afternoon, Zara continued her work as usual. Meetings, phone calls, emails with clients discussing marketing campaigns. But something inside her attention had shifted. She noticed things differently. Every decision felt connected to a future she hadn't fully imagined yet. Later that evening, she sat on her balcony watching the city lights appear one by one across Atlanta. Cars moved slowly through the streets below. Music drifted faintly from somewhere in the distance. Life continuing exactly the way it always had, except for one quiet difference. Inside Zara, a new story had already begun. One that would reshape every relationship in her life, including the one with Desmond. But for now, the pregnancy remained a silent secret, a truth growing quietly while the world around her continued moving forward. And the next time Zara walked into a doctor's office, she would learn something that would make the situation even more surprising than she imagined. The first doctor's appointment didn't feel dramatic. Zara almost expected it to. Movies often make those moments emotional and overwhelming, but the reality felt quieter than that. The clinic sat in a clean medical building not far from downtown Atlanta. Inside, everything smelled like disinfectant and fresh paper. Soft voices carried through the hallway. Phones rang behind the reception desk. Life-changing moments were happening in several rooms at once, yet the environment stayed calm. Zara signed her name on a clipboard and took a seat in the waiting area. Around her, other women sat flipping through magazines or staring at their phones. Some looked nervous. Others looked relaxed, like they had done this before. Zara rested both hands gently in her lap. No one around her knew the truth about the decision she had made. Desmond still had no idea. That thought passed through her mind several times during the short wait. She could have told him. The phone had been in her hand more than once over the past few weeks. But every time she considered it, the same question returned. Is his life truly ready for this? Because fatherhood wasn't something that fit neatly into complicated situations. It demanded presence, clarity, commitment. And Zara needed to see those things from Desmond before she invited him fully into this moment. Zara. The nurse's voice pulled her attention back. She stood and followed down the hallway. The examination room was small but comfortable. Medical equipment lined one wall while a monitor screen sat near the bed where the ultrasound would happen. First visit? The nurse asked while checking information on the chart. Zara nodded. Yes. Congratulations. The word landed gently. Zara smiled politely, but the emotion inside her was more complicated than that single word could capture. The nurse finished recording a few details, then stepped out briefly. A few minutes later, the doctor entered. Good morning, the doctor said warmly. Good morning. The doctor reviewed the chart and asked a few routine questions. Health history, general lifestyle, any symptoms Zara had noticed recently. Zara answered carefully. She had always taken care of herself, and that discipline now felt more important than ever. Eventually, the doctor turned toward the ultrasound machine. Let's take a look, the doctor said. Zara moved onto the examination bed and lay back. The lights dimmed slightly. The gel felt cold against her skin. For a moment, the room became very quiet, except for the soft hum of the machine. Zara watched the monitor as the doctor moved the device slowly. The screen flickered with shifting gray shapes. At first it looked confusing, abstract, like clouds moving across the sky. Then the doctor leaned closer to the screen. The doctor murmured softly. Zara's eyes stayed fixed on the monitor. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Oh yes," the doctor replied quickly. "Everything looks healthy." The doctor adjusted the device slightly, then smiled. "Well, that's interesting." Zara felt her stomach tighten. "What?" The doctor turned the screen slightly so Zara could see more clearly. "You're not just having one baby." Zara blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" The doctor pointed gently toward the monitor. "Two." For a moment, Zara thought she had misunderstood. "Two?" "Yes," the doctor said with a warm smile. "Twins." The word hung in the air. "Twins." Zara stared at the screen again. Now that the doctor pointed them out, she could see two tiny shapes forming. Two heartbeats, two lives growing side by side. A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "Twins?" she repeated. The doctor nodded. "It happens more often than people expect." Zara placed a hand over her mouth briefly. Her mind tried to catch up with the reality. One baby had already changed everything. Two babies shifted the entire future in a way she had never imagined. The doctor continued explaining details about the pregnancy, health expectations, monitoring schedules, nutrition and rest. But Zara's thoughts drifted between excitement and responsibility. Two lives would soon depend on her. Two futures connected to every decision she made moving forward. The ultrasound ended, and the doctor handed her a printed image. The tiny shapes on the paper looked almost unreal, yet they were already part of her life now. "Take care of yourself," the doctor said gently before leaving the room. Zara dressed slowly and stepped back into the hallway. Outside, the city moved exactly the same way it had that morning. Traffic lights changed. People walked past with coffee cups in their hands. Atlanta continued its daily rhythm, but inside Zara, the future had doubled in size. She walked to her car and sat behind the steering wheel for a moment before starting the engine. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. Desmond again. She stared at the screen. For a brief second she considered answering, telling him everything. The pregnancy, the twins, the entire truth she had been holding alone. But the same hesitation returned, because the decision to tell him wasn't just about honesty. It was about timing. She needed to see whether Desmond's life truly moved toward the clarity he promised. Not words, actions, consistency. And until she saw that, Zara wasn't ready to place two children inside a situation that still lacked stability. She silenced the phone and placed it back down. The engine started. Zara pulled onto the street and joined the flow of cars moving through Atlanta. The ultrasound photo rested on the seat beside her. Two tiny lives. Two unexpected blessings. Two responsibilities she would carry carefully. And as the weeks passed, Zara began preparing quietly for motherhood, without announcements, without dramatic conversations, just steady decisions. The pregnancy remained her private truth, growing stronger each day, until one night, 9 months later, when the moment arrived that no one can prepare for, labor, and the one call she finally decided to make. 9 months passed faster than Zara expected. At the beginning, the pregnancy felt like a secret she carried quietly through her normal routine. Meetings with clients continued. Marketing plans were drafted. Deadlines were met. From the outside, very little appeared different. But inside her life, everything had slowly rearranged. Her mornings began earlier. Her meals became more deliberate. Her calendar filled with doctor visits and quiet preparation. The small apartment that once held only the rhythm of her independent life gradually changed. Boxes arrived. Tiny clothes folded neatly into drawers. 2 small cribs assembled carefully in the corner of the bedroom. 2. Even after months, the idea of twins still surprised her sometimes. There were evenings when Zara sat on the couch holding the ultrasound photo, studying the tiny shapes that had once looked unreal. Now those shapes had become strong movements inside her stomach. 2 separate kicks. 2 small personalities already making themselves known. Some nights the baby seemed to move at the same time, and Zara would laugh softly while placing both hands over her stomach. "Easy," she would whisper. Despite the quiet excitement, one decision remained unchanged. Desmond still didn't know. Their relationship had continued through the months, but Zara kept a careful boundary around the truth she carried. She watched him closely during that time, not suspiciously, just thoughtfully. Desmond kept many of the promises he had made earlier. He worked through the process of separating his life from the marriage that had already ended emotionally. Conversations between them remained honest, but Zara noticed something important. Desmond still lived a life full of pressure. Meetings, investors, decisions that affected entire departments. Responsibility followed him everywhere, and Zara wondered constantly whether he was ready for the responsibility she carried now. 2 children. That question stayed with her through the entire pregnancy. She told herself she would speak when the right moment arrived. But time has a way of moving quickly when life is busy. Before Zara fully realized it, the final month had arrived. And on one quiet evening, the moment she had been preparing for finally came. The rain started shortly after sunset. Atlanta storms often arrive suddenly, the sky darkening before most people noticed what was coming. Zara stood in her living room adjusting a small stack of folded baby blankets when a tight sensation pulled across her stomach. She paused, waited. The feeling faded. She continued folding the blankets. 5 minutes later, it happened again. Stronger this time. Zara placed the blanket down slowly and rested both hands against the edge of the table. A calm understanding formed in her mind. "Okay," she said softly to herself. Labor. The doctor had explained the signs carefully during her last visit. The early contractions often arrived gently. Then they grew closer together. Zara checked the time. The next contraction came 8 minutes later. By the 4th one, there was no doubt left. It was time. She grabbed the hospital bag she had packed weeks earlier and walked toward the door. The drive to Northside Hospital felt strangely peaceful. Rain tapped steadily against the windshield while city lights blurred across the wet streets. Traffic had thinned because of the storm. Atlanta looked quiet, almost reflective. Zara kept one hand lightly on the steering wheel and the other resting across her stomach. "You picked a dramatic night," she murmured gently. Another contraction tightened across her abdomen. She breathed slowly the way the doctor had taught her. Steady, controlled. By the time she reached the hospital parking lot, the contractions had grown stronger. Inside, the nurses moved efficiently, guiding her through the check-in process. "First baby?" One of them asked kindly. "First and second," Zara replied with a tired smile. The nurse laughed. "Well, you're about to have quite an introduction to motherhood." They guided her into a delivery room. The environment felt calm despite the urgency of the moment. Machines hummed softly. Monitors displayed steady rhythms. Outside the windows, rain continued to fall across Atlanta. Hours passed. Labor stretched longer than Zara expected. Each contraction demanded focus, breathing, strength. But somewhere in the middle of that long night, Zara realized something important. She wasn't afraid. The entire pregnancy had quietly prepared her for this moment. Every decision she had made alone had built the confidence she needed now. Eventually, the doctor entered the room again. "It's time," the doctor said gently. The next moments blurred together in waves of effort and determination. Zara held the hospital bed tightly while pushing through the final contractions. Her body worked with ancient instinct. The room filled with focused energy. Then suddenly, a cry, small, sharp, alive. The first baby arrived. A nurse lifted the tiny child carefully. "It's a boy," she said. Zara barely had time to absorb the moment before the second wave of labor began. Minutes later, another cry filled the room. "It's a girl." 2 voices, 2 new lives announcing themselves to the world. Tears slid down Zara's cheeks as the nurses placed the babies beside her. For a moment, she simply stared at them. So small, so real. The boy stretched his tiny fingers outward as if reaching for something. The girl blinked slowly before settling into sleep. Zara touched their hands carefully. Her voice came out soft. "Hello." Everything else in the world felt distant in that moment. Work, complications, unanswered questions, all of it faded. Only one thought remained clear. These 2 lives depended on her now. Eventually, the nurse spoke gently. "Is there someone we should call for you?" Zara hesitated. For 9 months she had carried this truth alone, but now the moment had arrived when the father needed to know. She picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered above Desmond's number. For a long second, she simply looked at the screen. Then she pressed call. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Zara lowered the phone slowly. Desmond was somewhere across Atlanta living the same life he had lived earlier that evening. Unaware that 2 children had just entered the world, the nurse looked at her gently. Want to try again later? Zara nodded. Yes. She placed the phone on the table beside the hospital bed. The twins slept peacefully next to her. Outside, the rain continued falling across the city, and somewhere, not far away, Desmond's phone rested silent. The same phone that would soon ring with a message that would change his life forever. The drive to Northside Hospital felt longer than it actually was. Desmond barely remembered leaving the house. One moment he had been standing in the hallway with his phone pressed against his ear, trying to process the nurse's words. The next moment he was behind the wheel of his car, headlights cutting through the dark streets, as Atlanta slid past him in a blur of traffic lights and late-night restaurants. Twins, a boy and a girl. The words repeated in his mind like an echo that refused to fade. Zara had been pregnant for 9 months. 9 months. And he had known nothing about it. The realization settled heavily in his chest. He gripped the steering wheel tighter as the hospital sign finally came into view ahead. For years, Desmond had built a reputation as a man who stayed ahead of every situation, every contract reviewed, every deal carefully calculated, every decision made with precision. Yet somehow the most important moment of his life had been happening quietly without him even noticing. He parked quickly and stepped out of the car. The night air felt cooler than he expected. Inside the hospital entrance, the environment was calm. Bright lights, clean floors, the steady movement of nurses and quiet conversations drifting from the hallway. Life continued normally inside those walls, even though Desmond felt like his entire world had just shifted. He approached the front desk. The receptionist looked up with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Desmond said quickly. "I'm looking for Zara. I was told she delivered twins tonight." The receptionist checked the system, then nodded. "She's in recovery. Room 417. Desmond exhaled slowly. "Room 417. The number suddenly felt important. "Congratulations," the receptionist added warmly. Desmond gave a small nod. "Thank you." But the word felt strange coming from him. Congratulations. Most fathers spent months preparing for this moment, reading parenting books, decorating nurseries, attending doctor visits. Desmond had spent those same months living his normal life, completely unaware that 2 children were on their way into the world. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt quiet. Too quiet. Each passing floor brought him closer to a moment he had never imagined experiencing this way. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched ahead under soft lighting. Room numbers lined the walls. 410, 411. Tyrista de Venacht. His footsteps slowed as he approached the next door. 417. Desmond stopped. For the first time that night, doubt crept into his mind. What was he supposed to say? How do you walk into a room where someone carried your children for 9 months without telling you? And how do you face the truth that you missed everything? Doctor visits, ultrasounds, the first time those tiny heartbeats appeared on a screen, moments he could never experience now. The sound of a soft cry reached his ears from inside the room. A baby. His baby. The hesitation disappeared. Desmond opened the door. The room felt quiet. Soft hospital lighting filled the space. Machines hummed gently in the background. Zara sat upright in the bed, holding one of the babies carefully against her chest. The second baby rested inside the bassinet beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Desmond stood near the door, frozen in place. Zara looked at him calmly. Her face carried exhaustion from labor, but her expression remained steady. "You came," she said softly. Desmond stepped forward slowly. "I just found out." His eyes moved toward the bassinet. 2 tiny shapes wrapped in hospital blankets. 2 lives he had helped create. The boy stirred slightly. The girls slept peacefully. Desmond felt something inside him shift in a way he couldn't describe. "They're mine?" he asked quietly. Zara nodded. "Yes." No anger, no accusation, just the truth. Desmond walked closer, his eyes never leaving the babies. "They're so small," he whispered. Zara watched him carefully. "They were born a few hours ago." Desmond rubbed his hands together nervously. "Twins." "Yes." He let out a slow breath. Zara, why didn't you tell me?" The question hung between them. Zara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted the baby in her arms and looked down at the tiny face for a moment before speaking. "Because I needed time to understand the situation." Desmond frowned slightly. "What situation?" She looked up at him. "The same situation that existed the day I found out I was pregnant." The words landed gently but firmly. Desmond understood what she meant. His marriage. The unfinished life he had been slowly separating from. "You could have told me," he said quietly. "I thought about it many times," Zara replied. "Then why didn't you?" She held his gaze. "Because I needed to see whether you were truly ready to live an honest life." Desmond looked confused. "You think I'm not honest?" "I think you were living in between decisions," Zara said calmly. The room fell silent again. Desmond lowered his head. That description felt painfully accurate. Zara nodded toward the bassinet. "Do you want to hold them?" Desmond looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He stepped forward carefully. His hands hesitated slightly before lifting the tiny boy from the bassinet. The baby stirred in his arms. Desmond's entire posture changed instantly. He held the child carefully, like something precious that could break if he moved too quickly. A quiet laugh escaped him. "Hey there," he whispered. The baby stretched his fingers outward. Desmond swallowed hard. For the first time since entering the hospital, the reality fully reached him. This was his son, his daughter, 2 lives connected to him forever. He placed the boy back down gently and picked up the girl. Her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, and something inside his chest cracked open. "I missed everything," he said quietly. Zara nodded. "Yes." The honesty stung more than anger would have. Desmond looked at her again. "Why now?" he asked. "What do you mean? Why tell me tonight?" Zara leaned back against the pillow. "I called you when labor started." Desmond blinked. "You did?" "Yes." He remembered the missed call suddenly, the phone ringing earlier that evening, the moment he ignored it while driving home. A wave of guilt washed through him. "I didn't know," he said. "I know." Her calm response made the moment even heavier. Desmond looked at the babies again. "I should have been here." Zara studied him quietly. Then she said something that shifted the entire conversation. "You're here now." But before Desmond could respond, footsteps echoed outside the hospital room. Fast, determined. And a moment later, the door began to open. Neither of them knew yet that the next person entering that room was about to change the night completely. Back at the Buckhead house, the silence had started to feel strange. When Desmond left earlier that night, the woman he brought home had been sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, half listening as he explained he needed to step out for a while. He didn't give details, just a quick sentence. Something came up. "I'll be back later." At the time, she hadn't questioned it. But as the minutes turned into nearly an hour, curiosity slowly replaced patience. The house felt too quiet. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, glancing around at the spotless counters and expensive appliances that looked more like decoration than something people used every day. Desmond lived well. That much was obvious. But tonight the house felt oddly empty. Not peaceful. Just empty. She walked back into the living room and sat on the couch again. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway where Desmond had taken the call earlier. Something about the way he left had been rushed, distracted. And now the silence was beginning to bother her. Her gaze landed on the coffee table. Desmond's phone charger rested there, but his phone was gone. For a moment, she simply stared at the space. Then she stood up and walked toward the hallway. When she reached the small table near the entrance, she noticed something. Desmond's spare phone. He sometimes carried 2 devices for work. The screen lit up as she picked it up. Several recent calls appeared in the log. One number repeated twice. Unknown, but the label underneath caught her attention. Northside Hospital. Her eyebrows pulled together. Hospital? Her heart began beating faster as she opened the call history. The timestamp showed the call had happened less than an hour ago. And immediately after that call, Desmond had left the house. The realization settled slowly. He wasn't handling a business emergency. Something else had happened. Something he hadn't told her. She stared at the screen again. Northside Hospital. The decision formed quickly. If Desmond wasn't going to explain what was happening, she would find out herself. Within minutes, she had grabbed her purse and headed toward the door. Outside, the city lights reflected across the wet streets. Traffic was light this late at night, which made the drive across Atlanta quicker than usual. But the entire time she drove, her mind kept returning to the same question. Why would Desmond rush to a hospital without saying anything? Her grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel, and the deeper she thought about it, the more uncomfortable the answer began to feel. Back inside Northside Hospital, Desmond stood beside the hospital bed holding his daughter carefully. The tiny baby had already settled into sleep again, her small fingers resting loosely against his hand. He watched her for a long moment, still struggling to accept how quickly his life had changed. Zara leaned back against the pillow, observing quietly. Exhaustion was beginning to catch up with her after the long hours of labor, but her eyes stayed focused on the scene in front of her. Desmond finally placed the baby back into the bassinet beside her brother. For a moment he simply stood there. "I still can't believe this," he said quietly. Zara smiled faintly. "It takes time." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I missed the entire pregnancy. Yes, I should have been there." "You're here now," she repeated. Desmond looked toward the babies again. "I want to understand something," he said. "What? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Zara answered calmly. "Because I needed to know whether you were building a life based on truth or delay." Desmond lowered his eyes briefly. "That's fair," but before the conversation could continue, the door swung open suddenly. The sound startled both of them. The woman from the Buckhead house stood in the doorway. Her eyes immediately locked onto Desmond. For a moment the room fell completely silent. Then her gaze moved. First to Zara, then to the bassinet. Two tiny babies sleeping peacefully beside the hospital bed. Confusion flashed across her face. Then disbelief. Then anger. "What is this?" she demanded. Desmond turned quickly. His expression shifted from surprise to something closer to dread. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I followed you," she replied sharply. Her voice carried through the room louder than anything else that night. "I checked the call log on your other phone, Northside Hospital." Her eyes returned to the babies. The pieces of the situation began connecting inside her mind. "You left me sitting in your house," she said slowly, "to come here, for this." Zara remained silent. She simply watched, studying the woman's reaction with the same careful attention she gave every complicated situation in her life. Desmond stepped forward. "Listen." "No," the woman interrupted, raising a hand. "You listen." She pointed toward the bassinet. "You have 2 newborn babies in this room, and you never thought to mention that part of your life." Desmond opened his mouth, but no explanation came out, because the truth was already clear. Zara spoke for the first time. Her voice remained calm. "You should lower your voice," she said gently. "This is a maternity floor." The woman turned toward her. "And you must be Zara." "Yes." Her eyes narrowed. "So you're the reason he rushed out of the house." Zara shook her head slowly. "No." She nodded toward the babies. "They are—" The woman stared at the twins again. The reality finally landed. 9 months. An entire pregnancy. A life Desmond had never mentioned. She laughed once in disbelief. "Wow." Her eyes returned to Desmond. "You've been living 2 completely different lives." The room grew quiet again, but the tension had shifted. What had begun as a private conversation between 2 parents had suddenly turned into a confrontation none of them expected. And in that moment, the direction of the night changed again. Because Zara was about to say something that would reshape the entire situation, something that would reveal exactly where she stood in this complicated story. And when she spoke, both Desmond and the woman would realize they had misunderstood her strength completely. The room remained silent for several seconds after the woman's last words. 3 adults, 2 newborn babies sleeping peacefully in the bassinet. And a truth none of them could ignore anymore. Desmond stood between the hospital bed and the door, looking like a man suddenly aware that every decision he had delayed had now arrived in the same room at the same time. The woman crossed her arms tightly. Her eyes moved between Zara and the twins again. "So, let me understand this," she said slowly. "These babies are his?" "Yes," Zara replied calmly. "And he never mentioned any of this?" Zara shook her head once. "No." The woman let out a breath of disbelief. "That's unbelievable." Desmond ran his hand through his hair. "I didn't know about the pregnancy until tonight." She turned toward him sharply. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth." he said, but the situation had already grown bigger than his explanations. The woman looked at Zara again. Her tone shifted slightly, less aggressive but still tense. You knew about me, didn't you? Zara didn't hesitate. Yes. And you stayed involved anyway. Zara nodded once. I believed his marriage was already ending. The woman scoffed quietly. That's what he tells everyone. Desmond opened his mouth to respond, but Zara lifted her hand slightly. Stop. Both of them looked at her. Zara adjusted the baby blanket beside her before speaking again. Her voice stayed steady. Arguing about the past won't change the situation standing in this room. Her eyes moved toward the bassinet. Two small faces slept peacefully, unaware of the tension surrounding their first night in the world. For a moment, all three adults looked at them, and something about the innocence of those babies shifted the energy in the room. The woman sighed and stepped further inside. So what happens now? She asked. It was a fair question. Desmond didn't answer, because the truth was, he didn't know. For years he had built his life around careful planning, controlled outcomes, but this moment had no strategy, no prepared solution. Zara answered instead. Now, she said gently. She looked at Desmond. Now you go home. Both of them stared at her. What? Desmond asked. You heard me. Her tone stayed calm but firm. You should go home. The woman blinked in confusion. You're serious? Zara nodded. Yes. Desmond stepped closer to the bed. I just got here, and you've already seen your children, Zara replied softly. He frowned. You're asking me to leave? Zara met his eyes directly. I'm asking you to think. The room fell quiet again. Desmond searched her face, trying to understand what she meant. Zara leaned back slightly against the pillow. You spent years avoiding difficult decisions, she continued. Tonight those decisions finally arrived. The woman watched the exchange carefully. For the first time since entering the room, her anger had softened into curiosity. Because Zara was not reacting the way most people would expect. There was no yelling, no accusations, just calm clarity. Desmond shook his head slowly. I want to stay here with you. Zara gave a small smile. That's not the issue. Then what is? She looked at him steadily. The issue is that you still don't know where you belong. The sentence landed heavily. Desmond opened his mouth to argue, but Zara spoke again before he could. A man who doesn't know where he belongs should not be standing in a room full of mothers. The words filled the quiet hospital room. The woman near the door stared at Zara, not offended, not angry, just surprised. Because that sentence wasn't about winning an argument. It was about responsibility. Desmond lowered his eyes. He understood exactly what Zara meant. This moment wasn't about romance. It was about honesty, about finally choosing the life he had avoided defining for so long. He looked back toward the bassinet. The twins slept peacefully, their tiny chests rising and falling gently. Two lives that would depend on him moving forward. Desmond reached down and lightly touched the boy's blanket. I'll come back tomorrow, he said quietly. Zara nodded. You should. The woman stepped aside as Desmond moved toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. His eyes lingered on the babies. Then, on Zara. Something inside him had shifted. He could feel it. Responsibility had arrived in a way no business deal or career milestone had ever demanded. Without another word, he walked out into the hallway. The door closed softly behind him. For a moment the room remained silent again. Then the woman spoke. You surprised me. Zara glanced at her. How? I expected you to fight for him. Zara looked down at the twins. I'm not fighting for a man. Her fingers gently adjusted the blanket covering her daughter. I'm protecting my peace. The woman studied her carefully. And him? Zara shrugged slightly. That depends on the choices he makes next. The woman nodded slowly. After another moment, she turned toward the door. Well, tonight has been educational. Zara smiled faintly. That's one way to describe it. The woman paused before leaving. Then she looked back once more. You're stronger than most people would be in your position. Zara's eyes returned to the babies. No, she said quietly. I'm just clear about what matters now. The woman left the room. The door closed, and the hospital became quiet again. Zara leaned back against the pillow, exhaustion finally settling into her body. The twins slept peacefully beside her. Two new lives. 2 reasons to move forward with strength. Outside the room, the hallway lights remained bright. But inside, the calm of early motherhood slowly filled the space. And for the first time since labor began, Zara allowed herself to breathe, because the storm surrounding her life had finally revealed something important. She didn't need to compete. She didn't need to prove anything. She simply needed to raise her children with the dignity her grandmother once taught her. And that realization made her stronger than any argument ever could. The hospital hallway felt different when Desmond stepped out of the room. Inside, the air had been warm and quiet, filled with the soft breathing of 2 newborn babies and the calm strength Zara carried in her voice. Out here, the world felt colder. Brighter lights, footsteps echoing along the polished floor, machines humming behind distant doors. Desmond stood still for a moment, staring down the empty corridor as the weight of the night finally settled fully on his shoulders. 2 children, a son, a daughter, his children. And he had nearly missed the moment they entered the world. Not because he didn't care, because he had spent years delaying the difficult decisions that would have prepared him for a moment like this. Zara's words followed him down the hallway. A man who doesn't know where he belongs should not be standing in a room full of mothers. The sentence wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. That was what made it harder to ignore. It was honest. Desmond walked slowly toward the elevator. The doors opened with a quiet chime. Inside the elevator, his reflection stared back at him from the polished metal walls. He barely recognized the expression on his own face. For years, he had been confident in every room he entered. Boardrooms, negotiations, investor meetings. But tonight, the man staring back at him looked uncertain. Not weak, just aware. Aware that the most important responsibilities in life cannot be handled like business negotiations. They require presence, commitment, clarity. The elevator reached the ground floor. Desmond stepped outside into the cool night air. The city had quieted. Most of Atlanta was asleep now. He walked to his car without rushing. For the first time in a long while, his mind wasn't thinking about work. It was thinking about the tiny fingers that had wrapped around his thumb earlier that night. His daughter. The way his son had stretched his arms as if already testing the world around him. The memory made something tighten inside his chest. He sat in the driver's seat but didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes. 9 months of life he had missed. Doctor visits, conversations about the future. Moments when Zara must have wondered whether she should tell him. Moments when she decided not to. He couldn't blame her, because deep down, he understood exactly why she had made that choice. For years, he had been living carefully between decisions, avoiding final conversations, letting situations stretch longer than they should. In business, hesitation could cost millions, but in personal life, hesitation could cost trust. Desmond started the car. The drive back to Buckhead passed quietly. Streetlights flickered across the windshield as he moved through nearly empty roads. His house came into view again, the same house he had pulled into earlier that night. But now it felt different. Before, it had been a place of comfort. Now it felt like a place where difficult truths waited. He parked in the driveway and stepped inside. The lights were still on. The woman sat on the couch where he had left her earlier. Her eyes lifted the moment he walked in. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. She studied his face carefully. "You saw them," she said. Desmond nodded. "Yes." Her expression softened slightly. "Twins? A boy and a girl?" She looked down at her hands. "That explains the hospital." Desmond stepped further into the room. "I should have told you more about my life." She gave a small laugh that carried no humor. That might be the understatement of the year. He didn't argue, because she wasn't wrong. She leaned back against the couch cushions. "So what happens now?" Desmond took a slow breath before answering. "I need to be a father." The sentence came out simple, clear. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to soften the truth. She watched him carefully. "And us?" Desmond met her eyes. "There shouldn't be an us." Silence filled the room again. But this silence didn't feel explosive. It felt final. She nodded slowly. "I guess that makes sense." Her voice carried a quiet disappointment, but not surprise. Maybe she had already sensed this outcome. "Tonight changed things," Desmond said. "Yeah," she replied softly. "It did." She stood up and walked toward the door, picking up her purse from the small table near the entrance. Before leaving, she turned back toward him. "You know something?" she said. "What?" "For all the success you've built, tonight might be the first honest decision you've made in a while." Desmond didn't respond immediately. Because the truth in that statement felt uncomfortable, she opened the door. "Good luck," she added before stepping outside. The door closed behind her. The house became quiet again. Desmond walked slowly into the living room and sat down. For the first time since building his company, the silence didn't feel like a break between responsibilities. It felt like the beginning of one. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. 2 newborn babies were sleeping in a hospital room across the city, his children, and tomorrow morning, when he walked back into that hospital, he would no longer be a man avoiding decisions. He would be a father learning how to earn his place in their lives. Morning arrived quietly across Atlanta. The city woke the way it always did. Traffic returned to the highways. Coffee shops opened their doors. Office lights flickered on in tall buildings downtown. But for Desmond, the morning didn't feel ordinary. He had barely slept. The night had been filled with long stretches of silence inside the Buckhead house. Several times he sat staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments from the hospital, the twins, their tiny hands, Zara's calm voice delivering the hardest truth he had heard in years. "You don't know where you belong." That sentence stayed with him. It didn't accuse him. It simply described him. And once a person hears the truth clearly, ignoring it becomes impossible. By the time the first light of morning appeared through the windows, Desmond had already made his decision. He wasn't going to run from this responsibility. Not emotionally, not legally, not privately. He got dressed and drove back across the city toward Northside Hospital. The building looked different during daylight. Cars filled the parking lot now. Visitors moved in and out of the entrance, carrying flowers and balloons. Life celebrating new beginnings. Desmond walked through the doors slowly. The receptionist from the night before looked up and recognized him. "Back again?" she asked kindly. "Yes," she smiled. "Room 417. Desmond nodded. The elevator ride felt shorter this time, not because the distance had changed, because his mind was clearer. When he reached the 4th floor, the hallway buzzed with quiet activity. Nurses walked between rooms. Family members whispered outside doorways. Room 417 stood exactly where it had the night before. Desmond paused briefly before knocking. "Come in," Zara's voice answered. He opened the door. Sunlight filtered softly through the window beside the hospital bed. Zara sat upright, looking more rested than the night before, though the fatigue of childbirth still showed in her posture. The twins slept in the bassinet nearby. Desmond stepped inside carefully. "Morning," he said. Zara looked up. "Morning." There was no tension in her voice, just calm acknowledgement. Desmond moved closer to the bassinet. "They're sleeping again." "They've been doing that a lot," Zara said with a faint smile. He studied their tiny faces again. The boy shifted slightly in his blanket. The girl remained still, breathing softly. Desmond rested his hands on the edge of the bassinet. "I've been thinking all night," he said. Zara watched him quietly. "That sounds productive." He exhaled slowly. "For years I told myself I was managing everything responsibly." Zara didn't interrupt. "But the truth is, I was delaying the decisions that mattered most." He looked at her directly. "I don't want to do that anymore." Zara folded her hands in her lap. "That's a good place to start." Desmond nodded. "I ended things last night." "With the woman from the hospital?" Zara asked. "Yes." Zara accepted the information without visible reaction. She had expected that decision, but her expression remained neutral. "That's your choice to make," she said. "It is." Desmond stepped closer to the bed. "I'm not here asking you to forgive me overnight." Zara raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's realistic. I'm here because I want to earn something instead." "What's that?" "My place as their father." The words hung in the room. Zara glanced toward the bassinet. The twins continued sleeping peacefully. Then she looked back at Desmond. "Fatherhood isn't something you request," she said calmly. "It's something you prove." "I understand that." "Do you?" Desmond nodded. "I missed the pregnancy." "Yes." "I missed the first months of their story." "Yes, but I don't want to miss the rest." Zara studied his face carefully, not searching for promises, searching for sincerity. Because words are easy. Character is something people reveal over time. After a moment, she leaned back slightly against the pillows. "You know something interesting?" she said. "What?" "For 9 months I imagined this conversation." Desmond listened. "Sometimes I imagined being angry with you. That would have been fair. Sometimes I imagined refusing to let you meet them. That would have been understandable." She paused. "But when they were born, something changed." Desmond waited. Zara looked down at the twins again. "Life stopped being about my feelings." Her voice softened. "These two deserve stability." Desmond nodded slowly. "And stability requires integrity." "Yes." He met her eyes again. "That's exactly what I'm trying to build now." Zara held his gaze for a few seconds. Then she said something that surprised him. "I don't need you to choose me." Desmond frowned slightly. "You don't?" "No." She gestured toward the twins. "I need you to choose integrity." The simplicity of the statement made it powerful. Because Zara wasn't fighting for romance. She was protecting the foundation her children would grow up standing on. Desmond nodded. "That's exactly what I'm choosing." The room grew quiet again. The kind of quiet that happens when two people understand the seriousness of a moment. After a minute, Zara spoke again. "There's something I want to ask. Anything. If you had known about the pregnancy earlier, would it have changed the way you handled your life?" Desmond thought carefully before answering. "Yes." Zara watched him. "Why?" "Because nothing makes responsibility feel real faster than knowing someone else's life depends on your decisions." She nodded slowly. "That's true." Desmond looked toward the babies again. "They deserve better than confusion." "Yes, they do." He picked up the boy carefully. The tiny baby stretched his arms slightly before settling against his chest. Desmond smiled softly. "Hey there." Zara watched the moment. Then she looked toward the camera of this story for a moment of reflection. "And before we move forward, let me ask you something. Do you believe Desmond deserves a second chance to prove himself as a father? Or do you think some mistakes are too big to repair? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this often reflect real choices people face in their own lives. And sometimes hearing different perspectives helps us understand those choices better. Back in the hospital room, Desmond carefully placed the baby back into the bassinet. He looked at Zara again. "I'll be here," he said quietly. Zara nodded. "We'll see." And sometimes, that simple sentence is the beginning of trust rebuilding itself. The first few weeks after the twins were born passed in a blur of exhaustion and adjustment. Newborns don't follow schedules. They create them. Sleep arrives in short windows. Feeding times appear unexpectedly. Every small sound becomes important. For Zara, motherhood quickly transformed her daily rhythm. Her mornings no longer began with checking emails or preparing marketing strategies for clients. They began with the quiet breathing of two small babies sleeping beside her. Some nights were harder than others. 2 crying infants at 3 in the morning can test even the strongest patience. But Zara never complained. Because every time she looked at them, she remembered the promise she made to herself the night they were born. Their lives would grow from honesty, not confusion. And surprisingly, Desmond kept his word. He showed up, not with dramatic speeches or grand gestures, just presence. The first time he visited after Zara brought the twins home, he arrived carrying groceries and a small stack of diapers. Zara opened the door carefully, one baby resting against her shoulder. "You came prepared," she said. Desmond gave a small smile. "I've been doing research. On diapers? On fatherhood." Zara stepped aside so he could enter. The apartment had changed since the last time he visited months earlier. 2 cribs stood near the window, tiny clothes folded neatly in baskets, baby bottles drying on the kitchen counter. The space that once reflected Zara's independent life now held the quiet evidence of motherhood. Desmond placed the bags on the kitchen table. "Where do you want these?" "Anywhere helpful," Zara replied. He washed his hands carefully and walked toward the twins. They were awake now. The boy stretched his tiny legs while the girl stared at the ceiling with calm curiosity. Desmond picked them up one at a time. Each movement looked more confident than the last. Parenting wasn't natural at first, but it became easier with practice. Over the next months, that practice continued. Desmond attended doctor visits. He learned how to prepare bottles quickly during late-night feedings. He discovered that rocking a baby gently while humming something simple often worked better than pacing around the room. Some nights he sat beside Zara in the quiet apartment, while both of them tried to calm two restless infants. Exhaustion made them laugh sometimes. "Your son has your energy," Zara teased one night. "My son?" Desmond replied. "You don't see the way he kicks?" Desmond smiled. "And your daughter has your patience." Zara glanced down at the baby sleeping against her chest. That might help her survive this world. Moments like that slowly built something new between them. Not the same relationship they once had. Something steadier. Trust that grew through actions rather than promises. Months passed. The twins grew stronger. Their tiny fingers began gripping toys. Their eyes followed movement across the room. Laughter appeared more often in the apartment. One warm afternoon in early spring, Zara and Desmond sat together on a bench in a small Atlanta park. The twins rested on a blanket spread across the grass. The boy tried grabbing handfuls of the fabric, while the girl watched the movement of leaves above her. Children always notice small details adults overlook. The city moved quietly around them. Families walked along the path nearby. Music drifted faintly from a passing car. Zara leaned back against the bench and watched the twins carefully. "You know something?" she said. "What?" "The night they were born, I thought my life had become complicated beyond repair." Desmond looked at the children too, and now, she smiled softly, "now I realize it just became honest." He nodded slowly. "That's a better foundation." Zara glanced toward him. "You've changed." Desmond chuckled. "Fatherhood has a way of doing that." "Yes, it does." The twins began making soft sounds, reaching toward each other clumsily as babies sometimes do. Desmond laughed quietly. "They already seem like a team." "They are," Zara said. She watched them for a moment longer. Then she spoke the lesson that had guided every decision she made throughout this story. "Love can survive mistakes," she said gently. Desmond listened carefully. "But it cannot survive dishonesty." The words rested in the quiet air between them, not as criticism, as truth. Desmond nodded slowly. "I understand that now." The sun dipped lower in the sky as the afternoon continued. The twins eventually fell asleep beside each other on the blanket. Two small lives beginning their journey in a world that had already tested the people responsible for raising them. But sometimes the strongest families grow from difficult beginnings. Because when honesty replaces confusion, people finally learn how to build something real. And before we end this story, let me leave you with one final thought. If this story touched you in any way, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes the right story at the right moment can help someone make a better decision in their own life. And that is exactly why stories like this are worth telling. Thank you for spending this time with Mr. Stevens Stories, where real-life lessons are shared through unforgettable storytelling. Until the next story, stay thoughtful, stay strong, and never forget that integrity always shapes the future.